Welcome back to our podcast.
Today we are wrestling with a giant.
Yeah, a massive one.
And I know your immediate reaction when you see the title of this one. You're probably thinking, I did this in 9th grade. I already know this story.
Right, it's boy meets girl, the families fight, double suicide, tragedy ensues.
Exactly. It's almost the ultimate high school English cliche at this point.
It really is. I mean, it's the cultural wallpaper of the Western world. We all think we've seen it a million times. It's basically the greeting card version of romance now.
But that is exactly why I wanted to pull this specific stack of research for you today. Because looking through these sources, and we have a really wild mix today.
We really do.
We've got everything from a dense philosophical treatise on the nature of attachment to a PhD thesis on something called genre film remediation.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Oh, it's so good. And we even have a breakdown of Elizabethan astrology.
Yeah.
And when you put all these together, it becomes very clear that the version of Romeo and Juliet we keep in our heads is just way too simple.
It's almost a domesticated version of the story, like we've stripped away all the actual danger.
Right, completely. But these sources argue it's actually this ferocious debate about free will versus determinism, that it's a blueprint for modern gangster films. And maybe most surprisingly, that it's a systematic philosophy about having the courage to suffer.
And that's the angle that really grabs you, I think. Because we tend to dismiss the lovers as just naive kids making bad choices, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the research suggests they might actually be the only emotionally mature people in the entire play.
That is a bold claim. So our mission today is to figure out why. Why does this specific story endure the way it does? We aren't going to recap the plot for you. You know the plot.
Please, no plot recaps.
Right. We're going to unpack the machinery under the hood. We'll look at this hierarchy of human desire the sources talk about, how filmmakers translate a 400-year-old text into modern visual codes, and finally, why the adults in the room are actually the real villains here.
It is entirely a tragedy of failed adulthood. Absolutely.
Let's start with the philosophy, because we have this source, the philosophy of Shakespeare, which makes a pretty aggressive argument right out of the gate.
Well, it really doesn't hold back.
No, it claims the play is structured around this concept of a hierarchy of desire. And it uses one specific speech as the map for the whole thing, which is Mercutio's Queen Mab speech.
Which is famous for being incredibly difficult to stage and understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's often performed just as Mercutio completely losing his mind, just rambling about fairies and spider legs and chariots.
Right, usually the actor is just running around the stage shouting.
I always just thought it was him being, a chaotic friend. But this source says it's actually a rigorous categorization system.
It is. The source argues that if you look closely at who Queen Mab actually visits in that speech, Mercutio is building a literal pyramid of human psychology. He's categorizing humanity into 3 tiers based on how they handle passion and pain.
Okay, let's slow down and walk through these tiers because this really changes how you see the other characters. So who is at the bottom of this pyramid?
At the very bottom, you have what the source calls the stolid or the phlegmatic tier. In the speech itself, these are the courtiers and the parsons.
Okay.
When Queen Mab visits them in their sleep, she just tickles them. And what do they dream of? They dream of suits and benefices.
So like career advancement. Money.
Exactly. It's prudent self-love. These are people who view life as a transaction. They avoid strong emotion entirely because emotion is risky. They avoid pain at all costs. They are the ultimate safe players.
In the context of the play itself, who actually fits that description? Because it's a play full of people screaming and scabbing each other.
The source points directly to Benvolio.
Benvolio. But he's the nice guy. He's the peacemaker.
He is. But look at his advice. Think about when Romeo is heartbroken over Rosaline at the very start of the play. What does Benvolio actually say to him?
He says, examine other beauties, right?
Yes. Or, one fire burns out, another's burning. His advice is essentially just, replace the object of your affection to stop the bane. It's the logic of a portfolio manager, not a lover. He's saying, diversify your assets so you don't lose everything.
That is a wildly cynical way to put it, but I see it. He just wants to keep the temperature down at all times.
And notice what happens when the tragedy actually hits. When the bodies start dropping in Act 3, Benvolio just vanishes from the play.
Wait, really?
He simply ceases to exist in the text. The source argues this is because the stolid personality cannot exist in a tragedy. They literally can't handle the depth of that reality, so the narrative just ejects him.
That is fascinating. Okay, so that's the bottom tier. Risk-averse, emotionally numb, transaction-focused. What is the next level up?
The middle tier is what they call the spirited. In the Queen Mab's speech, this is represented by the soldier, Queen Mab drives her chariot over his neck, and he dreams of cutting foreign throats, of breeches and Spanish blades.
So it's all about violence and honor.
Yes, but specifically it's about ego. This tier is driven by pride, by tribal loyalty, and by status. They are willing to face physical danger, which technically makes them braver than the stolid group at the bottom, but their motivation is still entirely about the self.
Right, it's about how I look in front of my friends, how my family looks.
Exactly.
This has to be Tybalt.
Tybalt is the perfect example, certainly. He is pure aggression and family pride. But here's the twist the source adds, which is brilliant. The tier is also Mercutio.
Wait, but Mercutio's the one giving the speech. He's analyzing himself.
He's diagnosing his own pathology. The source argues that Mercutio is absolutely terrified of the vulnerability that comes with real connection.
Oh, I see.
So he hides behind this massive wall of spirited aggression and mockery. He turns everything into a joke or a sword fight because if he actually stops moving, he might have to feel something.
So the Queen Mab speech isn't just a random ramble. It's a symptom.
Hmm.
He's manic because he's repressing something deep.
Precisely. He would literally rather fight a duel to the death than admit he's lonely. He mocks Romeo constantly for being in love because love is a surrender of the self, and the spirited man absolutely refuses to surrender.
That adds so much weight and tragedy to his death. He dies protecting his pride, essentially. So if Mercutio and Tybalt are the middle tier, who is brave enough to be at the top?
The top tier is the passionate. In the speech, Mab presses the maids. Now, Mercutio is making a dirty joke there. He's talking about sex, obviously.
Yeah.
But philosophically, the source argues this represents the courage to bear the weight of another person, to create something new, even if it hurts.
And this is the exclusive domain of Romeo and Juliet.
They are the only ones in Verona brave enough to ascend to this top tier. They prioritize their sympathetic rapport, their deep connection, over their own safety, over their social standing, and eventually over their own lives.
It completely reframes that whole dumb teenager trope we were talking about earlier. The argument here is that the adults are actually the immature ones because they're stuck in the stolid tier, just worrying about money and politics. The kids are the only ones acting like actual adults.
Because they are the only ones accepting the true cost of being human. I mean, think about Romeo. He starts the play as a bit of a poser, right?
Oh, totally. He's moping around in the woods, obsessing over Rosaline. It's very performative.
It feels like he's just in love with the idea of being in love. He's playing a role. But through his connection with Juliet, he learns to endure real, profound pain. He stops being a passive victim of his own emotions and decides to take action. When he hears she's dead, he doesn't just cry and write a poem. He enters a state of what the source calls courageous endurance.
Which segues perfectly into the forces that are arrayed against them. Because if they are trying to carve out this elevated space for high-level attachment, the universe itself seems determined to crush them. We have to talk about the stars.
We do. And to do that, we have to check our modern skepticism at the door.
Right, because the YouTube source we have on Elizabethan astrology makes this really clear. To you and me today, astrology is just horoscopes in the back of a magazine. But to Shakespeare's audience,
it was hard science. It was astrophysics. Queen Elizabeth herself had personal astrologers, like John Dee, who advised her on exactly when to schedule her coronation based on the stars. They believed that the stars emitted literal physical fluids or forces that influenced human bodies and events.
So when the prologue calls them star-crossed lovers right at the top of the play, that's not just a pretty metaphor.
No, it's a medical and cosmic diagnosis. It means the literal physical mechanism of the universe is grinding against them. The source mentions the philosopher Boethius here, who Queen Elizabeth actually translated herself, by the way. He popularized this concept of fortune.
Fortune as in, like, good luck or bad luck?
Fortune as in God's middle management.
Okay, I love that.
The theological idea was that God is perfect and unchanging, right? But the sublunar world, our messy human world down here, is governed by fortune, which is chaotic, cyclical, and constantly turning. So when bad things happen, it's not random. It's the wheel of fortune turning. It's mechanics.
And you see that exact anxiety in Romeo very early on. Before he even goes to the Capulet party where he meets Juliet, he says he fears some consequence hanging in the stars. He intuitively knows he's walking into a trap set by fortune.
He feels the literal weight of the machine pressing down on him. But, and this is the crucial turning point for his character, remember what he screams when Balthazar comes to him and tells him Juliet is dead.
I defy you, stars.
Yes, That is the exact moment he leaves the spirited and stolid tears behind forever. He is looking at the entire mechanical universe and saying, no. He is refusing to be Fortune's fool. Even if his only way to assert control is through his own suicide, it is his choice. He reclaims his agency from the heavens.
It's almost existentialist.
It is entirely existentialist. It's a radical assertion of the individual self against a rigged system.
Speaking of systems and rigged games, another source in our stack brings up this pervasive theme of duality in the play. It points out that absolutely everything in Verona is two things at once.
This is so central to understanding the atmosphere of the text. Friar Lawrence explicitly states it when he's out gathering herbs and holding that flower. He says the exact same flower contains both poison and medicine. Virtue itself turns vice, being misapplied.
Which is basically the tagline for the entire story. Love turns to death, healing turns to poison. But the source points out a specific reversal of usual literary tropes that I hadn't really noticed before. Usually in literature, light is good and dark is bad.
Right, daylight is safety, night is danger. But in Romeo and Juliet, the light is incredibly dangerous. The sun is hot, the mad blood stirring happens at noon, the street fights, the banishment, the insults, all of that violence happens in the glaring, oppressive light of day.
And the night.
The night is their only sanctuary. The balcony scene, their wedding night, their secret plans, it all happens in the dark. They have to create their own moral universe in the shadows, because the light of the public world, the world of Benvolio and Tybalt and the prince, literally burns them up.
It creates this constant sense of vertigo. Juliet even articulates it when she finds out Romeo killed Tybalt. She says, beautiful tyrant, fiend angelical. She's constantly wrestling with these opposites crashing into each other.
It's meant to be deeply disorienting. If you're listening to the play or watching it, you're supposed to feel that instability in your gut.
Which brings us perfectly to the visual side of things. How do you actually show that textual instability on a screen? We have a fascinating set of essays here comparing the two heavyweights of cinematic adaptation, Franco Zeffirelli's 1968 version and Baz Luhrmann's 1996 Romeo plus Juliet.
This is the classic cinematic showdown. Zeffirelli is lush, Italian Renaissance, very faithful to the period and the romantic vibe. And Luhrmann is, well, it's basically an MTV fever dream.
It's so chaotic. But the sources argue Luhrmann isn't just being weird for the sake of being weird. He's using very specific visual tricks to solve real textual problems. Take the fish tank scene, for example.
This is a brilliant piece of filmmaking. In the original text, they meet at a crowded, noisy feast. But it's really hard to convey the intimacy of love at first sight in the middle of a literal mosh pit on film. So Luhrmann physically separates them with a giant aquarium.
The source vividly describes the deep blue water and the soft pastel colors.
It creates a literal visual bubble for them. It silences the aggressive noise of the spirited world around them, the fighting, the intense partying, and places the lovers in this suspended, fluid space. It perfectly visualizes that nighttime sanctuary we just talked about. They connect through the glass before they even speak or touch.
And then compare that sanctuary to how he handles the violence outside the bubble. The essays talk about his use of camera agitation.
Yes. When Tybalt and Mercutio finally fight, the camera is shaking violently. The cuts are incredibly fast, almost nauseating. It's disorienting. The source argues this is intentional mimicry. It's mimicking the adrenaline and the pure confusion of a real street brawl. Zeffirelli's fights are a bit more like elegant, choreographed dances. Luhrmann makes the violence feel genuinely dangerous and ugly.
And the music plays a huge role in that, too. The source notes the use of Prince's When Doves Cry and Radiohead. I remember some film critics really hating that back in the 90s, saying it's just pandering to teenagers.
But the essay argues it's a completely necessary translation. Look, if you play 16th century lute music for a modern teenager in a movie theater, they hear history class.
Right.
They instantly detach emotionally. But if you play aggressive alternative rock or Prince, they feel the exact same visceral emotion the characters are feeling in that moment. Luhrmann is translating the feeling of the play, rather than just dutifully recording the text.
There's one specific comparison the source makes that really highlights the difference in tone between the two films, and that's Mercutio's death scene.
This is the key difference. In Zeffirelli's version, Mercutio is bantering with Tybalt almost playfully. When he actually gets stabbed, everyone around them laughs. They literally think he's just doing a bit. It's a tragedy of an accident.
But in Luhrmann's version,
it is raw, unadulterated fury.
Mercutio is not joking. As the storm rolls in, he screams, "A plague on both your houses," with absolute venom. He throws his gun down. It underlines that whole theme of the spirited soldier. In his final moments, he realizes he is dying for nothing. He knows he's just a meaningless casualty of someone else's corporate war. It completely removes the romance of the sword fight and leaves just the horrific ugliness of the feud.
That ugliness leads us right into the PhD thesis in our stack, this concept of genre film remediation, which is quite a mouthful of an academic title.
It sounds incredibly dense, but the concept is actually really intuitive and cool. The core argument is, how do you solve the problem of Shakespeare's highly descriptive language? Because Shakespeare had no sets, right?
Just a wooden stage in the afternoon sun.
Exactly. He had to have characters literally say out loud, "Look at the dawn breaking," or "Look at how scary this graveyard is." Cinema doesn't need people to say that. The camera just shows you.
So remediation is about fixing that redundancy.
It's about suiting the action to the word by transplanting the core story into established modern film genres that the audience already intuitively understands.
Like the gangster film.
Exactly. The thesis discusses a film called Men of Respect, which is actually a gangster version of Macbeth, but the exact same logic applies to Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. If you set this story inside a mafia gang war, you instantly solve a huge plot problem for modern audiences. Why are they fighting? In the original play, it's just an ancient grudge. In a gangster movie, it's a turf war over corporate empires. We immediately understand the stakes. Life is cheap, the police are corrupt, and violence is inevitable.
You don't need a 5-minute monologue to explain why Tybalt has a gun and wants to shoot Romeo. He's a gangster. That's simply what gangsters do.
Right. It relies on what the thesis calls iconographic codes. A guy in a leather vest with a shoulder holster communicates danger to a modern audience the exact same way. A guy aggressively biting his thumb with a rapier communicated it to an Elizabethan audience.
The thesis also mentions Westerns, which I found really interesting. It uses King of Texas as the example, which is an adaptation of King Lear, but I can completely see Romeo and Juliet working as a Western.
Oh, absolutely it works. In a Western, the landscape itself becomes a character. And the core tenet of a Western is that the law is weak. The local sheriff is usually absent, corrupt, or powerless.
Which is exactly the prince in Verona. He threatens them, but he can't actually stop the street fighting.
Exactly. So men are forced to settle their disputes with frontier violence.
So by radically changing the genre, you actually make the original story clear. You aren't dumbing it down for modern audiences. You're just using a different visual vocabulary to see the exact same thing Shakespeare was saying.
You're translating described action, the words Shakespeare wrote, into depicted action, what the modern camera can show.
I love that framework. It makes you realize that Shakespeare isn't locked in the 16th century at all. His source code works in literally any setting where authority is weak and human passions are running high.
But, and this is where we really need to land the plane today, no matter the genre, no matter if the characters are carrying rapiers or customized 9mm pistols, the tragedy ultimately isn't about the weapons. It's about the people failing each other.
Yes. Let's do a deep dive on the characters themselves to wrap this up, specifically the adults in the room. Because the more I look at this stack of research, the more I just blame them for everything. We have to look at the nurse and Lord Capulet.
The tragedy of the adults in this play is fundamentally a tragedy of fear. Let's look at the nurse first. She's so often played just as comic relief, right? The funny, bawdy old lady.
And she genuinely loved Juliet. She practically raised her from birth.
She does love her, but the philosophical source makes a really devastating point. It argues her love is stunted. It's entirely based on dependency. She treats Juliet like a child or a pet or a doll, and when the rubber really meets the road, when Romeo kills Tybalt and gets banished, what is the nurse's actual advice to Juliet?
This is the scene that always makes me so angry. She tells Juliet to just marry Paris. She says essentially, look, Romeo's gone. He's as good as dead. Paris is rich and handsome. Just do that and be safe.
It is a total devastating betrayal. She is literally telling Juliet to commit bigamy. But more profoundly than that, she is invalidating Juliet's entire inner life. She's speaking directly from that stolid tier we talked about at the beginning. Avoid pain, secure the bag, marry the rich guy so we don't get kicked out on the street. She literally cannot comprehend the passionate tier that Juliet is operating in.
And that's the exact moment Juliet completely cuts her off.
Right.
She stops trusting the nurse from that second onward.
Because she suddenly realizes the nurse doesn't see her as a full person with a soul. She just sees her as a logistical problem to be managed.
And then there's Capulet. the dad.
Capulet is fascinating and honestly terrifying. Early in the play, he actually seems like a pretty progressive, good dad. He tells Paris, "My will to her consent is but a part." He seems to want Juliet to be genuinely happy. He calls her the hopeful lady of my earth.
But the absolute second she says no to the arranged marriage.
The mask falls completely off. He explodes with rage. He calls her a green sickness carrion. He calls her baggage. He threatens to literally let her starve and die in the streets if she doesn't obey him.
It's brutal to read. It shows that his love for her was entirely conditional all along. I love you exactly as long as you are a compliant extension of my own will.
It's deeply possessive love. It's about his legacy, his house, his authority in the city. The source argues that all the adults, Capulet, the nurse, and even Friar Lawrence with his overly complicated secretive schemes, are governed by fear. They are afraid of social fallout. They are afraid of the prince's wrath. They are afraid of poverty.
And Romeo and Juliet are the only ones who aren't afraid.
Or rather, they are Juliet is absolutely terrified before she drinks that sleeping potion alone in her room, but they value their connection more than they value their fear. That is the literal definition of courage.
It really changes how you view the ending. We usually see the double suicide in the tomb as this horrible, pointless waste of young life. And it is a waste. But based on these sources, it's also a radical act of defiance.
It's the final, ultimate rejection of the compromised, fearful, transactional world that the adults built. The source frames it almost beautifully. The world of Verona was simply too small and too scared to contain a love that big, so they had to leave it.
Wow, that hits really hard. So let's recap where we've been today. We started with the idea that this play is actually a psychological map, using Queen Mab to show us the difference between the stolid people who just sleepwalk through life avoiding pain, and the passionate ones who really feel it.
We saw how the literal mechanism of the stars and fortune presses down on them, and how they desperately try to carve out a sanctuary in the dark away from the violence of the day.
We looked at how brilliant filmmakers like Baz Luhrmann use noise, water, and modern genre codes to make us feel that pressure viscerally, basically updating the software of the play for a modern audience.
And we ended on the utter failure of the adults, the nurse and Capulet, who just couldn't be brave enough to support the lovers when it mattered most.
So here's the final takeaway. If you were to distill all of this research into one thought for the listener to take with them today,
I'd go right back to the philosophy source. We so often dismiss Romeo and Juliet as a cautionary tale about impulsive teenagers. We tell kids, don't be like them, they were stupid. But I think the real lesson is the exact opposite. The play is a tragedy because the kids were the only actual adults in the room, emotionally speaking. They were the only ones brave enough to understand that true, profound connection requires the courage to bear pain.
the adults were the real cowards.
So the question for you isn't, why were these kids so foolish? The real question is, why are we so afraid to be like them?
Exactly. Ask yourself which tier of the hierarchy you're actually living in. Are you the stolid courtier just dreaming of a pay raise and an easy life? Are you the spirited soldier fighting just for your own ego? Or are you brave enough to be passionate?
Oof, leaving you with a full existential crisis today. I absolutely love it. Go watch the movie again or read the play and look for those moments where virtue turns vice. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.